So finding a solution to a quadratic, up until now, we have either graphed it or we have factored it. So graphing a quadratic is kind of a pain because it takes a while. You have to be precise. So graphing, we really only graph quadratics if they say graph this quadratic. If they tell us specifically to graph, then we have to graph. But other than that, we really don't graph them because it's too much work. Factoring, which we talked about yesterday, or we reviewed yesterday, factoring is great. But the downfall of factoring is it doesn't always work. I mean, yesterday the factoring problems were really fast, weren't they? Factors of C that have a sum of B, and then it's mental math. However, if you do not have factors of C that have a sum of B, you can't factor. So we are going to talk today about the quadratic formula. And the good news is the quadratic formula works all the time. The quadratic formula works for all quadratic equations. Oops, RA. The quadratic formula works for all quadratic equations. So no matter what, it will give you your solutions. No matter how big, how small, this quadratic formula will give you the solutions to the quadratic. First thing, which is the same step as yesterday, the equation must equal 0. The equation must equal 0. If it does not equal 0, you need to make it equal 0. And all that means is that it must be in standard form. And if it says equals y, you substitute 0 for y. Or if it says f of x, you substitute 0 for x, f of x. It must be in standard form. It must equal 0. Step 2, you substitute. Step number 2, you substitute. Ladies and gentlemen, when you substitute, what must you do? Use parentheses.
May I have your attention, please? I need all choir students to report to the stage at this time. All choir students, please report to the stage at this time.
When you substitute, you must use parentheses. Step 3, after you substitute, you're going to simplify. Because you want to make things easier. After you substitute, you want to simplify. You need to make things easier on yourself. Haley can worry about Haley. You worry about you. No, no. And step number 4 is to solve twice. So the first thing we have to do is make sure that it equals 0. The second thing we do is we substitute. After we substitute, we simplify. And then we solve it twice. Because, ladies and gentlemen, a parabola is a U-shape. And where are the solutions to a parabola located?
On the x-axis.
On the x-axis. And most parabolas cross the x-axis twice. Because that's just the way that a parabola works. Some parabolas have one solution. some parabolas have no solutions, but a majority of parabolas cross the x-axis twice. So that's why we solve it 2 times. Here we go. Okay, Isaiah, you need to be quiet and focused, please. The quadratic formula. The quadratic formula starts with x equals because it's looking for the x-intercepts. X equals, right? So I'm finding the x-intercept. So my answer will be my x value. X equals negative b, or the opposite of b, plus, so the first time we're going to do negative b plus, and then the second time we solve, we're going to do negative b minus. So the first time we add, the second time we subtract. That's why we do it twice. X equals negative b plus or minus the square root of b squared minus 4 times a times c, and all of that divided by 2a. So, this will work every time. The quadratic formula will work every time to find your 2 or 1 or none, your solutions to a parabola. You do not have to graph it in order to find your solutions. You can use the quadratic formula to find the solutions to the quadratic. You do not have to factor. You can use the quadratic formula to find the solutions to the quadratic. Now, the quadratic formula over time, right, gets easier to use. But you have to pay attention and be specific and precise when first applying it. The quadratic formula is set to a song to help you remember it.
Oh, yeah.
It's set to the tune of Pop Goes the Weasel. It goes like this.
I remember this from ELA.
X equals negative b plus or minus square root of b squared minus 4ac all over 2a. Here's the problem with this. If you do not memorize the quadratic formula, it does you no good. You have to know the formula in order to apply the formula. So we're going to practice. We're going to do 3 practice problems with the quadratic formula. Here we go. Practice. We're going to do 3 practice problems. Problem 1. I suggest you stay focused so you do not have excess questions when you are working independently. If I give you the quadratic equation 2x squared plus 3x minus 5 equals 0. 2x squared plus 3x minus 5 equals 0. We are going to, for our notes, put all information down so that you can refer to it if you have a question. The first thing I'm going to do in my notes is identify my A value. What is my A value? 2. And I can start right here because it does equal 0. I'm ready to go. My B value is what? 3. And my C value is -5. So it's written in equals 0. It's written in standard form and it equals 0. So I know that I can start working. I don't have to do anything for the first step. I can just go straight into substitution. I'm going to rewrite my quadratic formula just because the more you write something, the more you remember it. X equals -b plus or minus the square root of b squared minus 4ac all over 2a. X equals -b plus or minus square root of b squared minus 4ac all over 2a. Here we go. Substitute. Substitute. And we substitute using parentheses. X equals negative, and what's my b value?
3.
Plus or minus the square root of b, which is 3 squared, minus 4 times a, which is 2, times c, which is -5. All over 2 times 2. Now, substituting. Now, here's the deal. Some people say, Mrs. Long, I'm just going to type this in my calculator. Now, there is no plus or minus button, so you have to do it twice. But here's my word of caution. If you type this in your calculator, the chances of you making an error when there are these many things to press increases. So that's why we simplify before we type it all in our calculator to get a final solution. So my simplification looks like this. X equals -3 plus or minus the square root. And I know that 3 squared is 9, correct? Mm-hmm. And I know that -4 times 2 is -8, times -5 is positive 40. And then I look at that and I say, oh, 9 plus 40 is, 49. So I'm going to cross that out and put 49. Divided by 2 times 2 is 4. Now I can use my calculator, or maybe even mental math, to find my solutions. Remember, step number 4 after you simplify is to solve it twice. I'm going to add the first time, and then I'm going to subtract the second time because it's plus or minus. -3 plus, what's the square root of 49? 7. What's -3 plus 7?
4.
Divided by 4 is
1.
My first solution is x equals 1. Second time I solve, I'm going to subtract. -3 minus, what was the square root of 49? 7. -3 minus 7. -10 divided by 4. -2.5 or 2.5 or 2 5/10 or however you want to write it. If I was to graph this parabola, I would get x-intercepts at 1 and -2.5. My parabola would open up because my a value is positive. But I do not have to graph in order to get these two solutions. I can use the quadratic formula to get these two solutions. Let's do another one. Problem 2. x squared minus 4 equals 2x. X squared minus 4 equals 2x.
It doesn't equal 0?
Doesn't equal 0.
Make it, so you have to make it equal
So you can
0.
fix it. Inverse operations make x squared minus 2x minus 4 equals 0, correct?
Yes.
I'm going to over-explain because these are our notes. Let's identify the a. What's my a value?
1.
1. What's my b value?
-2.
-2. And my c value?
-4.
-4. I'm going to rewrite the quadratic formula because the more you write something, the more you remember it. X equals -b plus or minus the square root of b squared minus 4ac all over 2a. Step number 2 is to substitute. When you substitute, you use parentheses. X equals negative, what's my b value? -2. Plus or minus the square root. B, which is -2 squared, minus 4 times a, which is 1, times c, which is -4, all over 2 times a, which is 1. Substitute. Once you substitute, we can simplify. X equals, what's -2? +2. -2. Plus or minus the square root. What's -2 squared? 4. -4 times 1 is times another -4 is +16. What's 4 plus 16? 20. Now I'm going to think to myself, wait a second, Mrs. Long. I don't know the square root of 20, so that tells me my answer is going to be what? A decimal. Divided by 2 times 1 is 2. Now you can use your calculators. We're going to add the first time, and we're going to subtract the second time. 2 plus the square root of 20. Well, that's between 4 and 5, correct? 2 plus the square root of 20. Or you guys just type it in your calculator. 2, can you see that? 2 plus the square root of 20 and get an answer because that's your numerator, correct? And then I'm going to divide by 2. Right? And I end up with 5, or radical 5 plus 1. I don't know what that means. Can I fix that?
Yeah, you just press the 2 little arrows.
Press the conversion button. So what are we going to put?
We're going to round to the nearest million.
3.24. X equals, oops, squiggles, not equals, right? 3.24, because I rounded. Then I'm going to do it again, and I'm going to subtract this time. 2 minus radical 20. Get an answer. Divide by 2. And then I'm going to convert that. What? -1 and 24 hundredths approximately, because I rounded, right? This one I would not want to graph. Do you agree?
Yeah.
I don't want to graph.
Do we have to graph anything on the
When do you graph?
homework?
If it says
Graph.
So if it tells you to graph, do you have to graph?
I mean, we should.
2x plus 5x squared plus 30 equals 0. 2x plus 5x squared plus 30 equals 0.
Big numbers.
Question number 1, does it equal 0? Yes. Let's over-explain. What's my a value?
5x squared.
Ooh, good catch. Standard form would be 5x squared plus 2x plus 30 equals 0. Gentlemen, pay attention, please. My a value is 5. My b value is 2. And my c value is 30.
Oh, that's tricky.
I'm going to rewrite my quadratic formula. X equals negative b plus or minus the square root of b squared minus 4ac all over 2a. If your problem equals 0, then we substitute. We substitute using parentheses. X equals negative 2 plus or minus the square root of 2 squared minus 4 times 5 times 30. All of that divided by 2 times 5. Did I substitute correctly? Negative 2 plus or minus the square root of 2 squared minus 4 times 5 times 30 divided by 2 times 5. Is that what you got? Let's simplify. X equals negative 2 plus or minus the square root. What's 2 squared? 4. What's negative 4 times 5?
20.
Negative 20, right? Times 30.
600.
Negative 600. What's 4 minus 600?
Negative 400. Negative 550.
Negative 596. Divided by 10. Do you agree? All right. Negative 2. The first time you do this, you're going to add negative 2 plus the square root of negative 900 or 596 divided by 10. What do you get? Negative 2 plus the square root of negative 596. What do you get? Hey, grab a calculator. Press the buttons. Negative 2 plus square root negative 596. Press enter and then divide by 10.
It says domain error.
It says domain error.
Yeah.
Why?
Because you put it
Can't
in
have a
right.
negative.
No, you put it in right.
It's 48.
It clearly says right here.
48.83.
It clearly says negative 2 plus the square root of negative 596 divided by 10. And when you type in negative 2 plus the square root of negative 596 and press enter, it says domain error.
Can't you just
It does.
square root of negative 596 and then do
Can't you find the square root of negative 596. Square root negative 596.
It's a negative.
It says domain error.
Can't find a negative.
You cannot find a square root of a negative number. Why not?
Because it's negative.
What does the square root mean? The square root of 16 is what?
4.
Because
4 times 4.
4 times 4 is 16. Or negative 4 times negative 4 is 16. The same number times the same number. The only way to get a negative value is to have one positive and one negative, which are not the same.
But then there's
If
the square root.
you are doing the square root of a negative value, it is no solution. This is called the discriminant. This is called, if your discriminant, if whatever's underneath the square root, if b squared minus 4ac, if your discriminant if whatever's underneath the square root, b squared minus 4ac, if you do b squared minus 4ac and you get a negative value, there's no solution.
Unless the bottom part's negative.
No.
Oh,
You cannot do the square root of a negative number as an Algebra 1 student. Because the only way to get a negative value is a negative times a positive. And a negative times a positive is not the same thing. They are two different numbers. Don't tell me negative $50 and positive $50 are the same amount. They're different. Correct?
Negative 50 is worse.
They are positive and negative are not the same. The only way to get a negative number is a positive times a negative. And square rooting means that the two numbers are exactly the same. So if your discriminant, if your b squared minus 4ac is a negative value, there is no solution.